Welcome to the Triclinium, a podcast named after the three-sided table used in the Lord's Supper, where you're invited to join the three of us as we think through matters of Christian faith, practice, and community. My name's Eric Burgers, and I'm here with my co-hosts Jacob Hawley and Nate Lead. Today we're going to be discussing Church and State, Part 2. We have, for some reason they're laughing at me in the background.
No,
we have...
I was laughing at Nate because Nate waved, but nobody can see that he waved. I was like, "Who are you waving to? Me?"
No, are we good though?
Yeah, keep going.
Cool. All right, yeah. Church and State. I think we wanted to pick up this discussion again after kind of listening back to the first episode. I think we all kind of felt we had something more to say or a little more to discuss. I guess me in particular, since I brought it up.
Since it was your idea.
Yeah. But, I think there could just be some more clarity on the topic. Before we get to it, though, let's... How we doing, boys?
Dude, I am doing good. I am chilling, just having a good Saturday. We typically record on Saturdays, so have a nice relaxing day. I got a haircut today, so I mixed it up a little bit, which is funny because I came home, you know, I threw a little fit actually after my haircut because I was like, I don't like it. I don't think it looks good. Because I don't like change. That's really what's at the root of it. And so when there's change, I tend to, withdraw myself. So I was like, I should cut it off. I should do a shorter haircut like I always do. And Lauren was like, no, it looks great. Like, what are you talking about? And then a little later in the day, she was like, it doesn't even look that different from what you had before. And I was like, yeah, you're right. So
funny.
Yeah.
Dude, it's crazy to me because, like, Nate looks like a male model. So, like, the fact that he comes home and is like, I don't like the way my hair looks. Like, if you picture, like, the most handsome man that could exist, that's Nate's. And it's like, all right, well... Bro, I'm making it All right, I'm gonna
He's
shut up.
buttering you up.
I know, seriously. I know. Now I'm nervous about what kind of questions he has for me on Church and State.
Oh, my gosh. It's so funny, dude. I also got a haircut, and I would say mine is a little more jarring than Nate's. I lost a bet at a party and got my head shaved, so I look like a cue ball right now, and that's the first time since I was probably 9 that I've had really short hair. But one other thing that happened to me recently, just an hour ago, is I was getting ready to get on the podcast with you guys, and before I did, I was like, I'm going to take a small nap because I was feeling tired because our generation can't stay awake all day. I went to take a 20-minute nap, and I woke up, and I swear I saw a spider that was about the size of a golf ball in its body. And I looked at this thing, and I was... Oh, dude, it was, it looked fatter. It was like a fatter, less of like the legs, more of the body. It was crazy. I didn't even know how it was moving. And like greenish. And I freak out, right? I'm like, oh my gosh. And it's like crawling on the wall right next to my bed. And then in the middle of it crawling, it disappears like a mirage into the wall. And I was like, what just happened? Like I think it was like a
secret
dream.
Agent spider.
Yeah, dude. Or it's still there and it's terrifying. It's gonna try to kill me while I sleep. But I had a moment where I was like, I don't even know what is reality anymore. Like it fully was there, and then like a hologram just like slowly morphed into the wall and was gone in front of my eyes, and it was bizarre. So
those things are fast. It probably just crawled away like when you blinked, dude.
No, dude, I watched it disappear. Like it was in the middle of my wall, and it just went pew, like out, gone.
Wow.
I'm looking up chameleon spider to see if this is a real thing.
No, as I'm certain it was a dream, but it was really vivid. Like it was bizarre.
Oh, I wish I could share my screen with you.
I'm on Team Dream.
I looked up chameleon spider, and like a green looking spider popped up.
It's just a picture, dude. It's just a picture of my room with me in the background, and it's a picture of the spider. It's like, what?
Dude, I wish I could show this to you. I'm gonna find out a way to show
Here,
it.
just flip your screen around, or what? Like,
no, I can't. I'm way plugged in. Does it look like that?
No, it was darker green. But yeah,
darn.
it kind of that big body. Like, yeah, that's pretty good. This is the best audio podcast that we've ever recorded with the pictures and visuals. Yeah,
Sherlock Eric.
this is very good. Everybody's having a great time. So, Eric, how are you doing?
I'm good. I think I'm tired because Briar hasn't been sleeping well, and that stinks. And on top of that, earlier this week, at my job, we had a job where we did a tree that was just covered in poison ivy, and I forgot a sweatshirt that day and gloves. So my arms are just covered in poison ivy sores right now. And it's just getting cold as well, so my face is also chapped too. It's just been kind of like a miserable week physically on my body.
What state did you say you were living in? Kentucky or hell?
Kentucky.
Which
but
of those?
It's kind of synonymous.
Oh no!
I just turned a lot of people
Not
off.
good.
Like SBC planted a school there.
But it's okay. It's okay. Well, they weren't originally there. Ironically, they moved.
I feel like I should cut that joke. That's a bad joke.
Originally, it is a fun fact that nobody cares about. But originally, the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary was stationed in Greenville, South Carolina, and then they moved eventually. Revolving factors around it, but yeah, now they're here in Louisville.
They put it on a flatbed truck and take it out here? Or?
Yeah, pretty much. How'd you know?
The whole seminary.
The Southern way, yeah.
They said we're not inland enough.
Oh my gosh. To hell we go. Anyhow. All right. Eric, you were the one that kind of pressed for this part two. I mean, I think we were going to do it one way or another, but I want to know, like, what parts felt like they were still unclear, or like where do you feel like we were missing each other the most in the last time we talked? Because the last time we talked, the big thing we talked about was voting and whether or not we could vote as Christians in good conscience, whether or not voting is participating in governance, and whether or not Christians should participate in governance. I've had some new thoughts on it, but I want to know, like, from our last one, where are you still feeling uncertain or unsure?
Yeah. Okay. So I just I almost think that we were talking on different wavelengths almost the whole time, because listening back to it, and you can correct me if I'm just misunderstanding you entirely here when I was re-listening back to it. Mm-hmm. Pretty much your position is just standard pacifism, as much as I understand it. Like, pretty much, like, you're, it has different, it might have different implications than what some pacifists say, but you're pretty much just against Christians using any sort of violence, and you would extend that idea of violence to voting, because voting enacts something, or Christians are using that to enact something on somebody else. Particularly, violence will come if that certain thing is not followed by the individual. And so, you should,
as punishment.
So Christians should abstain from any sort of practice that could lead to any enforcement of violence. And I kind of use that word tenderly because I'm not sure I agree that it's violence, because I think violence, I think I said this in the podcast, I think that word violence, kind of assumes malintent, and I'm not sure that's what's going on in the state, or what should be. So, am I sounding correct here? Am I kind of pointing to your position fairly?
Yeah, I think so. I wouldn't quite call myself a pacifist, although I know that the implication that I'm drawing is almost more strong than most pacifists would go to. I would say, I'm very into Christian nonviolence, and I do agree that with what you're saying, or like your description, that voting to me is a very small way of participating in government, and government is the one that has monopoly on force or violence. So they're the carriers of the sword, in the words of Paul. And so yeah, I get hesitant with Christians using anything, any like, what would you say? I get hesitant when Christians attempt to take up even the smallest bit of the sword. I think that's when I get really nervous. And to me, the government is the major source of the sword. There are other places where the sword can come up, right? Like self-defense, like we talked about.
Right.
And I'm not gonna say that you can never vote or that you can never take up the sword or that I'm not going quite to that extreme, but I would say I get hesitant about any use of the sword, even for the things that we think are the most good use of them. I just think that at a deeper level, I don't think that violence actually accomplishes what we want it to. I think we think that violence, you could say, rids the world of evil, and I actually think that it only duplicates and presses the problem down further. I don't know that it necessarily solves anything. So I don't think that. So when we say things like, well, we have to fight crime or whatever else, like, or we have to put up checks and balances and all these things. Like, I don't actually know that the violence does ultimately what we want it to be doing, and that would be my main concern. Is like, and then Christians are putting the name of Christ next to a tool that doesn't even do what it's supposed to be doing and causes harm to others. So,
that's interesting. A couple of things came up with what you said there, but that's interesting. You would say that last part. Because I think Christ puts...
Which part of the last part?
That Christ isn't trying to put his name next to violence, I think, is...
Oh, no. No, I wouldn't say that Christ is not trying to put his name next to violence. I would say that Christ is the only one that knows how to use violence for our healing.
Okay.
I don't know that we know how to do that. And so... our violence hurts people. Christ's violence heals them. I don't know how that works, but
sure.
I do believe it's the case.
Okay. Again, it's so interesting talking with you guys because there's so many different directions I want to go with this right now.
Yeah.
And it's a broad enough topic. Maybe that's on us. Maybe we need to be more specific in our topics. But
we're like, yeah, let's be a general podcast and let's talk about all these different things. And then we're like,
yeah.
Hang on, let's drill down on this one very specific note one of us said.
Hey guys, let's talk about all of politics.
Okay. Before I comment and take us down a rabbit hole on what you just said, let me finish with what I think we were saying alongside you in the podcast and why I think it just wasn't connecting.
Go for it.
I think it kind of seemed to me like me and Nate just assumed that it was weird that Christians can't participate in the government, while you were trying to talk about Christians shouldn't participate in civil duties, which is a function of the government. So like I almost feel like we were operating on different wavelengths there. Like there was a lot of presuppositions that weren't I think teased out originally that caused some confusion and mixing in the conversation. That was kind of my read on it. I don't know if you think the same. Yeah, go ahead.
To be fair though, I do also have, like, let's say, concerns or questions around Christians taking offices in government as well. Yeah. So like you were saying civil duty or civic duty or civil duty? I can't.
Either way,
I think it's civic.
Civic
I
or
could
civil.
be wrong.
Civil, I think it's probably the same either way, but whatever.
Okay, so yeah, whatever, whichever one it is. Taking those responsibilities, like paying taxes and voting, like there's going to be different kind of nuances to each of those. I get. Let's say, I'm not so sure that Christians should be putting themselves in places of governance either. So like you becoming mayor or governor or another one that I think we might talk about today. I get hesitant with force like the police or military. I think that too could be, you could say, mixing mixing with the government in too close a way, too tight knit a way. But that one I'm a little more open to because it's representative, and not just of my own desires, but of the will of the people. And so it becomes more like, I don't know, gray area-ish, because like there were definitely soldiers that were talked to by at least John the Baptist, and Jesus accepts a centurion as having as much faith as or more faith than the Jewish people. And so I don't know. Yeah, I'm not so sure on that one. I'm not quite sure. But yeah, I don't think that we should be contributing in a way that is, you could say, a more direct governance, where it's like my definitions of right and wrong, my definitions of good and evil are the things that are going to be putting people behind bars or worse.
Okay. Yeah, maybe I should just ask, like, I'm failing to understand how your views just differ from, again, standard pacifism. It seems like that's exactly something a pacifist would say.
I would say, I would say they differ in that I don't follow that as a rule. I follow it as a hesitancy. So okay,
can you tease that out a little bit? Like, why? So, for example, like you said just earlier, like you're hesitant towards it. I'm trying to remember exactly what you said. You're hesitant towards it, but you're not gonna say that Christians can't do it, I think is what you said. So, like, right. in your mind, then there's some scenarios in which a Christian could vote or could do something along the line. Let's just take, since we were talking about voting, let's take voting as the example. Like, that's a bit perplexing to me. Why? Like, when? Like, help me understand.
Yeah. It's a good question. I guess maybe the allowance is being made in the recognition of, or in an attempt to check my hubris. Like, I don't want to say something is a rule if I haven't teased it out to its furthest conclusions yet. I don't know. There's nothing I can think of right now where I would say, oh no, that's a legitimate use of voting or something like that. Maybe if it was like, so I was talking with my cousin about this, and I'll probably release the episode at some point on Sophomoros if you want to go listen to it. But we were talking about the same question, and he was saying, like, well, listen, if voting is more about, like, representation, like, if they want to know where your mind or heart is at, but they're not going to make the decision based off of your vote, then I think that there's more leeway. But if they're going to make the decision off of your vote, then you need to be more careful. And so I think in those cases, like, if it's basically like almost like a petition where you're signing it to show that you support something or don't support something, but it's not really gonna, it's not like there's no mechanic behind it that will force it as a concrete decision. I think that you could have more of a gray area there. I think it might be okay to vote in those situations. I'm considering the possibility of voting in scenarios in which it is on policies that would merely limit the government's reach. So, like, if it was like to let's say cut taxes or legalize something that's currently illegal, basically a way of saying, like, I'm going to shorten the sword of the government by my vote, then I think that might also be appropriate, because you're not enforcing anything on anyone. So it would be more libertarian, I suppose.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm picking up from you.
Although if you follow that too far, you just become an anarchist. And so I don't know that I necessarily would. I'm not fully on board for anarchism yet. So I'm like, I don't know. Yet I could be convinced.
I'll try anything once.
I have a buddy who's talking to me about it. So
you have a buddy who's talking to you about everything, bro.
I know, bro. Bro, I'm just getting indoctrinated from all these different vantage points.
Now I want to ask questions about why you would ever be an anarchist, but I don't think I want to spiral us into that.
That's another rabbit trail.
Well, that's the problem is I don't know yet. So don't tell me or don't talk
Join
to me
us
yet.
next episode where we try and figure
Yeah.
out if Jacob is an anarchist.
Oh no.
This podcast
No,
really went
I don't think I
off the
ever could
rails.
be an anarchist.
It's funny,
I don't think I
Jacob.
could be an anarchist because I do believe that the sword has been given. I just don't believe it's been given to us, Christians.
Yeah.
Right, I remember you saying that last time.
Yeah.
Nate, did you have anything you wanted to say or ask at this point?
Well,
no,
yeah.
I'm kind of driving a lot of questions. I don't want to hog.
No, this is great. Let's drill down on the voting idea in a different way.
Okay.
So this example is less so voting like how we're used to like voting, but you're still voting and making a decision that impacts somebody else. So what about like jury duty? Because that's a civic duty.
Ooh, Nate, that's a great question.
Thinking
'Cause
on the
if you-
fly is
Yeah,
tough.
man,
Yeah.
that's a really good question. I suppose you could participate in a jury, but I would also caveat that especially in matters where the use of the sword would be stronger, you might go into it and say, I have a proclivity against state violence, and so if you're going to ask my opinion, I'm going to lean towards excusing, even if the person did it. I think that would probably be my approach. This is not. I have not thought about this at all. This is my first knee-jerk reaction, so I might have to think more about that.
No, totally.
But that would probably be my reaction.
I had a feeling too, and you know, if my first reaction, I was like, oh, I wonder what he thinks about jury duty. I was like, he probably would say it's acceptable to be on a jury unless you're dealing with, like, you know, the level of punishment that you put on a person. Like it's almost like a sliding scale.
Yeah. Or even if it's clear that whatever has happened would be severely punished by the state, I would say that's when you want to start putting. If it's like they're gonna get a fine, you might have some like hesitancies, but you probably just do it, right? Like that's why I would say like sometimes it depends. Like sometimes I think you have to be cognizant of the arena that you're dealing in and the real stakes. And I think that like to make a grandstand out of everything is just like not wise necessarily.
Right.
Like,
to die on every
I think
hill
that-
is
to die on every
for
hill,
nothing.
right? So like, so it's like, you know, if my tax money was going towards, I don't know, like drug rehab facilities for people who, you know, well, actually, I don't know. I'm trying to think of another. There are things where it's like, I don't know. It's not great, but like it's also not the worst thing in the world. And I'm not gonna make a huge mess of it just because I, you know, of some principle. I'm learning that more and more in my life. It's like
Right.
it's okay. You don't have to be the moral hero of every scenario, right?
Right.
Like it's not necessarily great.
Yeah, the older I get, I realize the world's less black and white.
Right,
You know,
exactly.
There's a lot more gray area, but it is interesting. Just, you know, my knee jerk reaction, because I would say it's okay for Christians to participate in jury duty as well and to be a juror. So it's interesting that you would say that it's okay, you know, even to impose a small fee on somebody, you know, like or impose a fee on a corporation. But in our previous conversation, it sounded like you would dissuade Christians from using their vote to enact a certain law that would criminalize that certain thing.
Well, it
But
sounded
the
to me
end
more
result
like
is the
any-
same.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I hear that. So again, this is about measures of degrees. It's not so much like I would say, okay, if you're going to take it in the strictest possible sense, like you said, imposing the small fee on the person is a bending of the principle for sure. Like I'd be willing to say that. I don't know that I was talking with my pastor about this at one point, and he was like, so you're saying that it's wrong for Christians to vote on whether or not to put a stop sign in a certain place? Like, are you really like committed to it down to that level? And I was like, okay, yeah. So like, when you talk about ethics, there's always going to be considerations for where, like, is it really worth making a big fuss over this, right? Like, is Santa Claus immoral because it's a lie, right? Like,
Right.
at that point, you're like, okay, I understand that there may be some hesitancy, but, like, to call it a rule is just, I don't know, it's too much. This is where, too, I would say, like, we are not beholden. This is my ethical system. We're not beholden to the law at all. We're beholden to the law of Christ, and the law of Christ is discipleship. And so, and that is a far less encapsulatable, you could say, ethic than something like just straight up legalism is. Legalism, you just follow the laws and you're good to go.
Right.
I think Christ shows us some more living models of ethics that are harder, and the biggest thing is follow me, right?
Right.
So yeah, I would say that, and
Yeah, and I think that there's just to agree with you. I think that there's some oh man, what's that called? Precedents for that. I mean, that we see that with the Pharisees, right? They set up hedge laws and hedge laws for hedge laws, and they set up the law in a way to just follow the law and then you're fine. But it just became so numerous that the law was just everything, and Christ came and he flipped that on its head, really. So yeah, I agree with you in part.
there's here's another thing that I could say. Let's say you were imposing a fine on somebody in a jury situation. The guy, let's say the guy left his car out overnight in a certain place, goes to court about it for whatever reason. There's a jury. Like, I mean, that probably is not going to happen, but, like, for whatever reason, it's a question of like just a legal fee. How cool would it be if you allowed, like, you decided in your heart that you would vote guilty, and then you helped pay the fine for him? Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Sure,
there's Christian creativity can be used in the midst of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I think in that case, that's a much better witness than standing up and being like, I can't be on jury duty because Jesus says no, like, I think there's a way that Christians can be free in our ethics, to be creative and restorative and subversive, I would say, escaping binaries. So.
Mm-hmm.
Well, is there anything you want to ask us, Jacob? It's felt to me like we've spent a lot of time kind of dissecting the implications and practical applications of your view.
Yeah.
And we've kind of just assumed our position. I'm sure if anybody is actually listening to these, they can probably kind of infer where it seems like, Nate, I don't want to group us together too much without fully knowing your position, but it seems like we're kind of on the same track.
I hear Nate's an anarchist.
Don't you dare put that out on the internet. Future employers,
just that,
I promise.
Clip that one
Viva
part.
la
Nate's an
revolution,
anarchist.
brother.
I feel like people could probably infer a little bit. Just, I don't think that my view in particular is very far off from probably what a normal Orthodox Christian would think at this point in time. Just general Christian thinking. So, is there anything you wanted to ask us, Jacob, or press us on?
Yeah. Here would be one, and this will get us into a different area of church and state.
Perfect.
But again, this is kind of one that we were talking about a second ago. Is what? So okay, regarding like being in the military, being a police officer, being someone who carries the sword in the government's name, but isn't necessarily acting of their own volition. They're more acting on representation, on a representative basis of the government, right? So I would imagine, just to get my premises clear, that you guys both think that it's fine for a Christian to be a cop, let's say, or to be a major in the military.
I think I'm probably more comfortable with cop than military, but probably still both to yes. or both. Yes, both. Yes to both. Excuse me.
I like both to yes.
Both to yes. I'm not sure. I would make that divorce that it seemed like you just said, though. Like, I'm not sure you can rip volition from the individual officer or military.
For sure.
As a matter of fact, let's say you're a Christian and you're in the police force, and there's going to be laws and little subcategories that you're going to be faced with probably on a day-to-day basis, where perhaps you come across something that you find to be in the law, but you don't think it's just from a Christian perspective. In the case that you're dealing with, I think it's actually your responsibility to probably disobey that law, and be beholden to the law of Christ, as you would say, actually. So, and that goes back to what you were saying. I think pretty much everybody should recognize, and everybody probably subconsciously does recognize, that there's some flexibility within ethical systems, because life is messy and not everything fits neatly into a box. So yeah, so to answer your question, yes to both, but I wouldn't divorce volition from the individual military or police officer person, for the reason of honoring one's conscience and seeking to honor Christ first and foremost, and just laws. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's great. Yeah. If you're, let's say you're in a situation where, for whatever reason, let's say there's a dirty cop that you're working with or whatever, that's like, hey, let's frame this guy or whatever. Like, I think, yeah, there's moments where you need to step in and be like, you're not just gonna be like, well, I guess I'm not acting of my own accord. I'm acting on behalf of the police force, so I'll do this because it doesn't matter. Like, certainly there's gonna be, but for the most part, you would say. So maybe this is a better question to ask, is like, is there anything that a police officer is required to do that you know of that you would be like, well, we can't do that as Christians, for the most part? Required to do, not like like, right, obviously, I guess a cop could pepper spray a grandma in the face for 45 minutes, but he's not required to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Depends on how tough that grandma is.
Major sanctions for that, but
Is there anything that a cop is required to do that a Christian should not participate in? I'm not familiar enough with police conduct and ethics to make a informed stance on that. So I would say no. I'm not aware of anything off the top of my head.
Nate, you got anything?
That would be more of like a practical. Like, if you come across something as a police officer that you think rubs up against the law of Christ, then you're beholden to the law of Christ. Not
right. Yeah, exactly. An easy example would be not just a crooked cop, but a crooked sergeant in the police force, who is your commanding officer, who says, hey, you're going to take those cocaine bags and you're going to put them in the back of my car, and I'm going to drive away and sell them. It's like, I'm required to do that as a cop, right? Because my commanding officer just told me to.
Yes,
so I'm commanded to, but I'm not going to do that, because that's lying. That's going against the process. That's, distributing drugs. That's going to severely harm people's lives.
So it sounds like basically the same you would say to just about anybody in any vocation.
Yeah, right. Exactly. My response was going to be my unthought through, 3-minute analysis of the situation is yes to both. Christians can be majors in the military and police officers insofar as they can abide by their faith first and their orders second. Mm-hmm. The second they have to put their faith in the passenger seat, I think that's when, again, my unthought through opinion, I think that's when they should not continue to do their job.
To kind of give an example, it might be a little cheesy for some people, but I think it's actually a pretty good example for this. I was just watching the movie Batman Begins the other day, and
Okay.
I think actually Commissioner Gordon would fit well into this situation here. In the movie Batman Begins, Commissioner Gordon is not the commissioner yet. He's actually a lieutenant in the police force, and he's under a very crooked cop. He's bought out by drug lords who are like pushing cocaine through children's toys or something like that.
Right.
And he's
Right.
I'm not trying to say Commissioner Gordon's a Christian. I'm just trying to make an ethical map here to kind of show.
Right. With a fun example.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so Commissioner Gordon hates what's going on. He's fed up, just as Batman is. I'm not saying people should be vigilantes, which is why I think Commissioner Gordon is a better example. But just like Batman, Commissioner Gordon hates the circumstance that he's in and wants to see actual justice being done without the subversion of justice by crooked people and criminals, people subverting the justice system itself. And so he works with Batman and other people to take down not just the criminals themselves, but also to subvert his commanding officer, which is Detective Flass, I believe is his name is, in order to bring about actual justice. So Flass was wanting him to help in transporting drugs for the drug lords, and he would just have no part in it. But when Batman rolls around, he has a means by which to actually do something about it, take down not only the drug lords, but also the crooked cops as well that are involved in it. That would be a good case to map on to say that if, like, exactly what Nate was saying, if there's somebody above you that's you're supposed to follow as a commanding officer that's giving you orders that you have to follow, as a police officer, if you were a Christian in that scenario, yeah, you are beholden to not follow those orders. And if you find yourself in that position,
Right. Just like Gordon is beholden to a higher moral code, or so to
correct.
speak.
Yeah,
You know, so he
natural
subverts
law,
those
you might
orders.
call it. Okay. Anyways, so yeah.
So what I'm hearing is, I just want to clarify. So let's say Commissioner Gordon says no to drugs, just like he's a good boy would, and he does so. Let's say he does so on the principle that drugs are illegal, and so it would be breaking the law for him to do what he's doing. That's one condition. But what if he did it? There's another condition in which he does it because he thinks that there's an ethical problem with it, right? Like that drugs are bad for people, right? So it's not just because it's illegal; it's because drugs are bad for people, right? There's a heart behind it. Now, here's my question: there are times where laws, let's say laws, are not in accordance with what we would conceive of as a proper ethic or a proper morality, right? Where laws either tell you to do something that you should not be doing, or tell you not to do something that should be happening, right? Let's say as a cop, I think we can all agree that it's good when a police officer, for the most part, obeys the law, right? That's a good thing. But what if the cop has a problem with the law itself? Like, this law isn't ethical, right? So, for instance, let's say there was some order that went out, and I mean there have been nations where this kind of thing has happened, where a certain demographic is being targeted, and military or police force is being used to target a demographic of people, in a violent way. It's all legal. It's all happening according to the law, and this person is being commanded to do that, and they are equipped with the sword. So would you say that that's a place where they need to stop short because it's not ethical? So the ethical concerns of the cop actually transcend the law itself? Or would you say that they need to follow the law because they're a representative of the arm of the law?
Well, certainly from the Christian perspective, yeah, I think the ethical system precedes the law itself, because uh, even though God gives the sword to the government, that doesn't necessarily mean that the government is correct in the law at all times, because people who craft those laws are fallen and sinners themselves. So, yeah, I think you're beholden to your conscience if you can clearly identify that it violates Scripture, it violates the Holy Spirit communicating with you in regards to the law. Yeah, I think there's probably unjust laws in the United States right now that you could make a case for civil disobedience outside of like government official, like being a government official or a policeman or something like that, that you should disobey. There's probably things right now, even just for a civilian, that I think we should ignore certain laws. I'm not sure I could give an example off the top of my head. I have a couple, but I haven't fleshed them out enough. I'm just aware of some things. But yeah, it's the Acts principle with Peter and who was it? John, who was with him. We must obey God rather than man. If there's any sort of law that's subverting or directly against, in opposition to honoring God, or it dishonors God in its implications, yeah, you should honor God first and not participate in that. And that would be, as you're saying, the ethical system preceding and being over and against the law itself, because it's crafted by men.
Okay, so here's another question then. So, if how do you read Matthew chapter 5 when he says, "I tell you, do not resist an evil person"? Like, what does it mean to not resist an evil person? How do you read that?
Yeah, let me see. I'm gonna need some context before I just answer.
Sure.
What verse is it in?
Matthew 5:39.
39. Do not resist the one who is evil, but if anyone slaps you on the right. How do I read that? It seems to be specifically about retaliation. So somebody who is actively, eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, but I say to you, don't resist the one who is evil. I think it's just saying, like, I think it's saying to love your neighbor in the situation if you can. Yeah. I see where you're going with this. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't necessarily think that it's about retaliation, because in the next sentence he says, if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also, which to me denotes not just a don't hit them back, but a don't even try to keep them from hitting you again. Like, you're giving yourself entirely, right? If they ask you to go a mile with them, if they force you to go a mile with them, go 2, right? It's you could say it's creating a relational attribute of, or you could say an environment of generosity where the other person is looking to steal from you, right? It's like, okay, you're gonna take my robe, well, I'll give you my shirt as well, right? Like, it's giving in response to taking. So, okay, so my question then is, how as a police officer or as a soldier do you follow that command of Christ, even if the law is telling you to resist the evildoer, right? To not to turn the other cheek, but to actually slap them back, right? How do you follow that command and also, exist as somebody who carries the sword?
But surely you're not trying to use this verse to say that that somebody should not resist an evil person and carry on their evil. Like, our police officer shouldn't just put one cocaine bag in the commanding officer's car. He should put 2 cocaine bags in the officer's car. Like, you wouldn't say that.
No, because I'm not trying to say, in the event of something that is like properly illegal, that you need to disobey the law. That's not quite what I'm saying. I'm saying in the event that somebody, let's say you're in Afghanistan or whatever, and you're instructed to go out and clear a building with a bunch of insurgents in it, and there may or may not be women and children inside. But even if that, let's leave that aside. So this bank of insurgents has been shooting at you guys, and you guys could just retreat, and both of you could remain alive. But instead, your commanding officer tells you to go in and take them out because they've been shooting at you. You've been commanded to do something, right? But Jesus says if someone slaps you on the right cheek, turn them the other also, right? Don't resist the evildoer. If they take from you, give to them, right? If they dishonor you, allow them to dishonor you more. If they harm you, allow them to harm you more. Don't try to retaliate. Or even, it sounds like to me, and I know we disagree on this, but even self-defense, I'm not sure is sound under this teaching. So my question then is, what do you do if you have this passage in mind as you're headed towards the building with the insurgents in it? What do you do? Do you just push it to the back of your mind? I mean, maybe you guys interpret this passage differently, but for me, I would have this passage in mind, and I would be thinking, I don't know if I'm actually allowed to go and take out these insurgents for what they did to us, because this is, this is retaliation, or even just an act of resisting the evildoer, pushing back on someone that I think is evil.
Would you say that commanding officer making that command is doing something evil? So the commanding officer telling you to go and clear out that building is telling you to do something evil?
I think it's contrary to the command of Christ.
Okay, so you would say that person is, at least maybe not in their core, but at least is commanding you to do something evil. But then, if we were to read this verse in that regard, we shouldn't resist our commanding officer. Do not resist the evil person. Do not resist your commanding officer. Continue to do what he is telling you to do.
I see what you're saying. I don't think that's the sense. That's why I was careful not to say that he's doing evil by commanding you to do that. That's not.
Okay, I might have misunderstood.
Yeah. No, I would say he's telling you to go do something that's contrary to your faith, is what I would say.
Right.
And so I think when it says resist an evil person, I think it's talking about standing as an opponent to the evil person. I don't think saying no to your commanding officer is standing as an opponent to him. Now, if you went and shot him, that might be a problem. But yeah.
Man, I know that we're planning on doing Old Testament next, so I'm hesitant even asking this. But Jacob, it almost feels like you would have a really big problem with God commanding people to do exactly that in the Old Testament. Pretty much exactly what you're saying. Like Midian, for example, is oppressing Israel. I'd have to read it again. I read it the other night, but I'm in Judges right now in my personal reading, and obviously there's a lot of bad things happening to Israel, but also what Israel is doing to itself. And then God raises up a judge or a leader to go and take out the insurgents, essentially.
Yeah.
So like, are you just thinking that that's different because it's God saying it and not some commanding officer, or
because it's pre-Christ, maybe?
So a couple of caveats there. The first would be Jesus knows how to harm in a way that heals, or commit violence in a way that heals. I don't always understand what in what way the violence of God is different than the violence of man. But I take as a presupposition that it is. It has to be, because otherwise Jesus making these commandments would make God himself duplicitous. Because God, not only does God retaliate against people in a very clear way in the text, or commit, not only does he commit violence, but he retaliates, right? Like that in and of itself would mean whatever Jesus is teaching here, God is duplicitous. He's two-faced. He's doing one thing, saying the other. And I think that's untenable. So I think to some degree, yes, he's doing one thing, saying another, but when God commits violence, he knows how to commit violence in a way that heals. And I think that's the main source of our confidence in that, or like the main proof of our confidence in that, is the resurrection. The general resurrection, the resurrection of the dead at the final day. That is the healing of the nations that have been committed violence against, or you could say the descent into hell. The second part. Oh, you go ahead and respond to that, and then.
So there's no way in which post Christ a Christian indwelt by the Holy Spirit. There's no mechanism for us to understand how to do that nowadays. A Christian couldn't have direction from God in the same way that God directs the Israelites to carry out that action. There's no way in which a Christian today could carry out, say, a holy violence against somebody else.
Well, that's where I would say my ethics at the very root is obey Jesus. So if Jesus himself is telling you to go do something, I don't care if it's abominable. Go do it, because he knows, right? This is like Abraham and Isaac. God says, I have never required child sacrifice. I never wanted this, right? Later on, and I think it's like Isaiah, or in response to what's going on in I think 2 Kings, the sacrificing of children in mass quantities, right, to Moloch. I've never required child sacrifice, except for that time that he did of Abraham. And Abraham has to go basically without the confidence at all that God's going to stop him. And he's like, all right, I guess I'm going to go kill my kid. And I think in that instance, the ethical thing to do is to not kill your kid. Like, every parent should be... I think that's what God's pointing to when he says, I've never demanded infant sacrifice. Like, there is no ethics that you could come up with where killing a child like that is okay. And yet, God is also the one that tells Abraham, go kill your child. So when God tells you go do something, regardless of how crazy it sounds, you go and do it. Now, what do I then do with, let's say, the parent who has some sort of a psychotic break and thinks that God's telling them to go do something crazy? I think you also have to be willing to stand responsibly for the decisions that you make, even if you think God is the one that's telling you to do them. That's the crazy thing about being you could say, the instrument of God, even in instances that we might come across today. All right, we cut out there, but I was just gonna say really fast. The center of my ethics, you could say, is divine command theory. If God commands something, you go and do it. That being said, rules are always an approximation. The law is always an approximation of the will of God. And there are instances don't work on the Sabbath, except for when Jesus tells you to rub the grain together in your hands. Like, it doesn't matter whether or not it's work. He doesn't go into any attempt to qualify why it's work or why it isn't when the Pharisees ask him the question. He doesn't go, well, it's not work because I'm just using one of my hands, or, he doesn't give any rules. He just says, or any like caveats or anything. He just says, actually, the Son of Man is the Lord over the Sabbath. So the end.
I'm going to interrupt you here, but I think it's important to. So
go.
That principle you just laid out right there would not apply to Matthew 5:38 to 42. And I still am not sure that you answered my question, because I'm saying, so there's a rule that you showed, right, in Matthew 5. You're just saying that there's no mechanism by which a Christian can identify a way where it would be appropriate to kind of bend that
Violence.
rule. Am I making sense? Is that where you're coming from? I'm trying to understand where you're coming from.
I'm sorry. I'm trying not to be super like all over the place in my response, but I have to caveat a lot. So, like I said, the very heart of the law is follow Jesus no matter what, right? We have the Spirit of Jesus living in us, and I will concede the possibility that somebody who's a Christian might, have some vision or whatever where God says go and join the Iraq war, and then they have to go and join one way or another. I don't think that's the normative experience of Christians. And I think unless you have some sort of a divine command or some sense of like real, like reasoned conscience, what would you say? Like some real, I don't know. I don't even know. Like, cause to introduce the conscience means that anytime anyone has a religious feeling about violence, they can just do it, which I don't want to do.
It's
I don't want to
tricky,
have that
yeah,
as an option.
for sure. Yeah, nobody denies that. Yeah.
I think divine command theory is like maybe the best. I kind of want to hold to that as like if you are convinced and are willing to take the risk of standing before God and saying, I'm confident that God wanted me to go and kill those insurgents, then by all means go and do it. But I don't feel confident. I feel like if I was in the shoes of most people who are doing killings nowadays and the violence that they're doing, I would not feel as confident that God had actually wanted that.
Okay, now I feel like we're getting somewhere. I would say that's acceptable, an acceptable view, for sure. I'm not sure if I'm quite there. Well, yeah, it's only because I'm not sure if I'm quite on the same footing.
Oh, I see.
So
but I see where you're coming from.
I might be, but just to a different degree than you. Like I'm a little more comfortable with. Man, maybe we are on the same. Yeah, I think we are on the same, but just to a different degree. I'm trying to figure out where we're at still a little bit. But
would you say it's just more common for people to be assured in their conscience that God wants them to go and kill people or commit some form of act of violence, and that would be your way of saying violence is acceptable?
Just to put it practically, like to put it in more of a narratival type of perspective, like if the Nazis are knocking on the door and I feel it's principled that the best way to most exude the love of neighbor in that is to protect my own family. That's the most loving thing I could do in that scenario. Yeah, I think you could do that.
And you said it in a really interesting way too, Jacob, and I liked it. If you feel like you can stand before God confident of your action, confident that God at least commanded you, at least in some regard, to do that, then it's at least acceptable or understandable. I guess that's kind of where I come from when we get to self-defense theory, and that whole thing. It's like, yeah, I am confident in being able to stand in front of God saying that I defended my wife and loved my wife and my family in that manner,
Likewise, yeah.
So but I think that we agree on other points, So go ahead.
Well, and a part of this that again comes from Bonhoeffer's ethics that I appreciate, I think, is that at the end of the day, it doesn't even necessarily have to be the confidence that God called me to do this, but that if I am not justified for having done what I did, I'm willing to accept the punishment from God.
Right.
I'm willing to stand before God one way or another, whether or not he justifies me, and say, I feel I acted in accord with what,
with
what
I believe to be true
would do.
Right.
What love would do. Right. You might be wrong, right? God might be like, yeah, that was a dumb move. Right. And I think that's where you have to rely on the mercy of Christ, which is, again, when Nate asked last time, is this a salvation issue? No, it's not. I don't think it's a salvation issue. Although I'm not the Messiah, I don't get to decide that. I think, though, that I do think that it is an issue, though, when when we, by other means than the command of Christ, come to justify ourselves for things that Jesus never called us to do. And that can be down to the most minute thing. So I was reading The Cost of Discipleship a couple of days ago, and Bonhoeffer makes this claim where he's like, if you're, because he's talking about, have you guys read through The Cost of Discipleship yet?
Yeah, a few years ago.
Oh, we had to read through it for one of Anderson's classes, right?
We read through Life Together, the smaller one.
I feel like I've read Cost of Discipleship for something.
You probably have. I read it for a class. Yeah. I don't know if Jacob was in that class with me.
Yeah, it might have been a different class.
Maybe.
Regardless, yeah.
So in the very beginning, he basically makes this argument where he says that if I, let's say I hear the command of Christ to sell all I own and give to the poor, and I say to myself, Jesus really couldn't have meant that. What he really means is I have to cultivate some sort of an inner detachment to my things, and I'll own them, but I won't really own them as if I owned them. Right? Like I'll live as if, like in spirit I'm poor, but in reality I'll still have these things, because to not own them would be irresponsible. Then what I'm actually doing is my responsibility, in air quotes, is my idolatry, right? Like I am unwilling to follow the command of Christ to its letter, right? And that there is no obedience there. And where we get ourselves into trouble is we say, well, I'm justified though, because I have my moral principles, and my moral principles tell me that it would be less responsible for me to give my things away. So I'll just go ahead and say I'm responsible, and that means I'm justified. Well, you're not the one that justifies you. Jesus is the one that justifies you, and Jesus says, "Give up your stuff," right? If he's calling you to that. So in the same command, that was crazy. In the same sense, I would say, if we are coming to some form of self-justification for why we use violence or force, which I think most cases that's actually what's going on, is people are like, well, I know Jesus tells me to not be violent or to not resist the evildoer, but the Democrats are winning again, so I've got to, there's some sort of self-justification. I don't think that stands up in front of God at all. I think that is a flagrant form of disobedience. Now, whether or not Christ will forgive you for that is up to him, right? Because he's the author and source of grace. But to say, oh, I'm justified, I'm good, like, that's a dangerous game, I would say. So yeah, we're all sinners all the time, and that's what we need to remember.
I would totally agree with you in the self-justification route. I mean, I don't know what else there is to say to that other than I think you're spot on.
Eric, anything from you? Thanks, Nate.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have anything to add from that. I can appreciate your position, but again, yeah, I think we're just on different roadways, I guess, at this point. Again, I'm not entirely convinced that we just disagree. It just seems like degrees by which we would say it's acceptable that somebody could participate in some certain actions. And yours is much more like, well, and again, correct me if just misreading you here. Well, unless there's no biblical command or precedence to say that Christians should participate or even can participate in government or in warfare or what have you. But I'm willing to concede there is some positions where that could justifiably take place, but it would pretty much only be if I received a vision from God, a direct command from God to do that, because there's no biblical precedent saying I can do this. And I think I'm not going to speak for Nate. I'll just speak for me personally, but I think it is commanded by God, but I just feel that you can get there without that direct scriptural Christian verse that says Christians can participate in warfare, for example. I think we just have differing views on how love of neighbor practically plays out. Is what I'm.
That's fair. That's probably true.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah. I think I agree with you there.
That's what I was just gonna say too. Actually, because that's a great point. Because I think that I think we'd all agree with, at least in some sense, that when anybody tries to justify themselves, that can get into a really sticky situation. But a Christian could find justification for their actions based on how they read Scripture, and that's what I just heard from Eric. Is that what you would say?
Yeah, Scripture and the Holy Spirit guiding you internally, I think should be your roadmap for. Yeah, you should be evaluating your life for sure. Like I think First John lays that out. You know, like we gotta examine ourselves. I think that's definitely a New Testament principle.
Right, and if you find that you're doing something for a self-justifying reason, right, or that that you deem it okay because you deem it okay, right, self-justifying. That's the moment where we may find ourselves contrary or working against the love of Jesus.
Yeah.
I think that's what I'm hearing from both of you. And again, I think we're on the same road, at least just a little bit in different spots.
Yes, for sure. And life is complicated. It's not always going to be clear. And I think I've heard Jacob say before, everybody carries a little bit of guilt with them in how they handled or did certain how they presented themselves in certain situations. And ethics is tricky. It's hard. There's always going to be some moral uncertainty in real life circumstances, but we try to honor Christ the best we can. And I think, although you're saying, Nate, I do think we're generally on the same road. Yeah, I think we're just in different spots on it.
Yeah.
I think the reason that I am so strong on nonviolence is the same reason why I'm so strong in saying that Christians shouldn't abort children. I don't necessarily want to open up another hot button topic.
You're
now.
Getting there, brother.
But I think I'm gonna have to, just for the analogy,
can't bring up
because I think this is something that
without it being hot button.
Oh boy. I think that the three of us agree on this, and this is why I'm using it as an example to make my points maybe a little more intelligible. One of the massive reasons why I would say I'm anti abortion in the church is because I think that when it comes to taking away life, you can't give it back. Once you've made the decision, it's final, it's over, right? And in many cases of violence, it's the same, which is why I'm also against death penalty, at least I think it's not a good thing. I don't think Christians should be a part of governance, but I think that I think the death penalty is a really foolish doctrine. In the same way that I would say abortion is, because once you take away life, you can't give it back, and once you've done harm, you can't necessarily undo the harm, right? If I cut someone's leg off, it's not like I'm gonna be able to put it back, or if I give them a massive scar, I can't just take it away. And with violence comes a lot of you could say propagation of evils. Like we always say, hurt people hurt people. It's like, yeah, there's something true about that. We say it feels justified when we're in a feud and they did this terrible thing to us, so why don't we go ahead and do this even more terrible thing to them? But what we don't realize is we're propagating the same problem. The fact that neither of us is willing to back away is the problem, and that is what will continue to cost us. And so it's the finality really of it and the long-lasting implications of it that make me so hesitant. Whereas on the other side, enduring the violence of other people, but not giving it back to them, I think that at least with that, the consequences only are with me, right? Okay, so my taxes get raised, or I get thrown in prison, or whatever else, or I get hurt. That's one thing. To be governed, right? To have somebody hold the sword up against me is one thing. To then decide to go hold the sword up against them also, I think is the propagation of the human condition. It's the problem that we're all trying to solve, which is we're pressed to hurt each other. And again, I don't think that we necessarily know how to hurt in ways that actually heal. I think Jesus does, and I'm actually confident that Jesus does. And I even think that in certain circumstances, Jesus can heal the very wounds that we've inflicted on each other. I think that's part of what when we say forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us, I think that's part of what he's doing there. When Jesus heals the ear of the high priest's servant, I think that's what he's doing there. He's coming in to heal what the church has done wrong. But I don't think that that should negate the importance of being incredibly cautious when it comes to ways that the church could hurt the world rather than helping it or healing it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Nate, do you have any further thoughts? I mean, I think I'm ready to take a little intermission and
yeah, I think so too.
Do another
Me too.
episode.
Let's do it.
But
well,
yeah, I do want to say I definitely hear where you're coming from, Jacob. Yeah, I just think we're in different spots. I have disagreements with the analogy that you use with abortion, but
sure.
You know what? It was a good.
That's okay.
It was a good episode. I think.
Yeah, we got a little.
I think
closer to
better
at least
than
understanding.
Yeah, I think
totally.
Much better than the first one. I hope.
Yeah.
Well, now that we've solved all the problems of the universe, thanks for listening to this episode of Sophomoros. I mean, not Sophomoros. The
Oh my
Triclinium.
gosh, the wrong podcast.
But now, if you want to reach out to us, you can reach out to us at sophomorosofficial@gmail.com. That's SOPHOMOROS official@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to rate or review the podcast, that would be interesting, but I don't actually care, so you don't have to do that part. But we want to hear your thoughts. And as always, may Christ be exalted.